You know, the focus of Colorado Springs and really all of southern Colorado has kind of been on El Paso County and everything we've gone through along with Teller County over the last 2 years of the fires, the flooding, and now the recovery. And I know both of you are kind of on the cutting edge of what's going on in that recovery phase of both Waldo Canyon, Black Forest, the Manitou area with flooding there. So where are we at? Maybe we should talk about the work that has been done to this point, RC, and then what the long-range plan is for mitigation and for the healing of those areas of the mountain.
Okay, well, there's several parts to it. On the long-range plan, the things aren't going to be like they were. And
Okay.
I say that, we just left a meeting with the Forest Service, and generally they look at a 3 to 5 year time frame for about a 40% regrowth of just some grasses in the soil that'll help stabilize the soil.
Mm-hmm.
We have a specific situation here in Colorado in that those hills are so steep and they were so damaged by the fire, the soil actually so damaged by the fire, and the majority of it's decomposed granite, that we're probably looking at more of a 5 to 8 year time frame to get that 40% regrowth, to slow down some of that water.
What are you able to do to help that growth process go forward?
Well, there's several things. One of the things that we really try to work on, and it has to do with partnerships, is work with the Forest Service. Because the higher up the hill that we can go to do work, the more it'll slow the water down. And the thing that really tears things up, and what we saw in Manitou last August, was the sediment flow. Because all that sediment is that decomposed granite washing off the burn scar. So at the very highest areas, it's really simple, and they're log erosion barriers, where they just lay logs perpendicular to the hill, stake them in the hill, cover them with a geofabric, and then plant behind them.
Okay.
Hoping that they'll pull some sediment there and that things will grow in that. And then as you get further down into the channel, we've done some sediment catch basins, which are below grade, and we put logs in at an angle, cover them with fabric, and then the sediment will fill them up and flatten out, and it creates kind of a mini alluvial fan, which will slow the water down and help some of the sediment deposit there. So it doesn't make it as far down the hill. It takes some of the velocity out of the water and takes some of the sediment out of it, which does so much damage.
It's kind of like a speed bump, or you look at areas where they have culverts, and they'll usually put those big railroad ties in there to slow the water down. We're essentially doing the same thing coming down the hill.
Right. When you see like the bigger culverts in the city in a developed area, and they have those big concrete pads sticking up in them, they call them dragon's teeth.
Mhm.
That's exactly what they're to do, to slow that water velocity down, because the faster the water goes, the more it tends to channelize, and it'll rip up concrete too, which is what we saw in the 31st Street channel over on 31st Street, the channel in the middle of the street. The bottom of that channel was completely destroyed, and the city's just finished replacing it, hoping that it will now carry the water and the sediment won't tear it up.
And that was part of the work that was done on Highway 24 going up to Woodland Park just past Manitou Springs as well. That was part of that project?
All those projects fit together. One of our biggest cooperators has been the Colorado Department of Transportation. And last year, when the gentleman was killed on Highway 24, and everybody got to see the videos on YouTube and the news of the cars coming down the highway and the sediment flow, the Colorado Department of Transportation is like, we're going to have to take a real serious look at how we prevent this. Their number one concern is obviously keeping the highway open, keeping it safe for travelers, but it has to be open for commerce too. Like 26 to 28,000 cars a day go up and down Highway 24. And when it's closed, it has a huge impact to everybody, but it has to be safe. So the thing they did was that culvert that overtopped coming out of Waldo Canyon was roughly 60 inches. Filled up, blocked, really short period of time, all that sediment came out over the road. They've replaced that with a 21-foot by 7-foot concrete box culvert, which is roughly 10 times the area, for anybody out there doing the math, to carry that sediment under the highway. The thing that they've done in addition to that is acquire some property just upstream from that in Wattle Canyon to build a cleanable detention pond to catch some of the sediment before it goes through that culvert. So they kind of have a double, some redundancy there. Hopefully they'll catch most of it. What they don't catch should not, hopefully, overtop the highway.
How about in terms of debris? I mean, large chunks of stuff. Are we still going to see a lot of that coming down the mountain, or has the worst of it passed through?
Unfortunately, the worst of it hasn't passed through, and the reason I say that, and anybody that drives, even on the west side of Colorado Springs, looking at those hills, the majority of that burnt timber is still standing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just, with the literally hundreds of thousands of trees you're talking about, we don't have the resources to get up and pull those down. But they're coming down. And that's probably like a 3 to 5 year period. And they all come down at different rates depending on how tall they are, how much they were damaged, what their diameter was to start with. And when those come down, they'll create new challenges in those drainages.
If there is an effort to clear those areas, where would that come from? Would that come out of the county? Would that be part of the Park Service? Would that be volunteers?
Probably,
It
would be all
yeah.
of the above.
It would be all of the above. You know, one of the things that we did in Black Forest as actually a FEMA project, which was a public assistance project, was we cleared the hazard trees along the right-of-ways. Because along the county highways and state highways that are in Black Forest, we couldn't leave those trees standing. Because not knowing when they could fall or where they could fall into traffic, they could actually fall on traffic, which would be more unlikely, but they could fall at night and people wouldn't even see them, you know, until they hit a 10-inch diameter tree, which would obviously be catastrophic. So that's one way that we've done it on the more critical areas. And the other thing that we've done in the county is we've done the trails through the park out there, the regional park, so that people can recreate in the park and hike along the trails and have a certain degree of safety. When you start talking about 18,000 acres being burned in the Forest Service, I mean, the ability to go up and clear that right along our drainages, we've done some work, so as we do work, it's not immediately plugged up, but as you get further up the hills and the trees get denser, the level of effort just becomes overwhelming. We don't have the resources to really approach something like that.
Well, and it takes equipment. I think sometimes it's great to have volunteers, and volunteers provide a very important component to a lot of the handwork that needs to be done. But it takes heavy equipment to do some of these detention ponds and to get those erosion barriers, those log barriers in, because these are pretty substantial pieces of very heavy, not only equipment, but a lot of times they have to create underneath a very substantial base for these ponds that are created to catch the debris. You know, in one of the incidents that happened last year as a result of Waldo Canyon, there was 13,000 tons or so of debris that was captured in those catch basins. And imagine if that had continued and come on down the mountain. And so we're really looking at trying to slow that water, catch the debris, so that it doesn't create such havoc downstream. And frankly, you know, we've lost homes after the fire that were not part of the fire at all in Manitou Springs along Canyon Avenue. And they're continuing to see some problems along Canyon up above where Williams Canyon feeds right down. It's sort of like the bathtub at the bottom of where all the drainages hit.
Is there a concern, and I bring this up, you were watching footage this morning of Minnesota and landslides there, and with the amount of water we've had come through that area, is that a concern?
You know, I don't think in terms of probably the type of ground that we're talking about up on the mountain is different. It's a different composition. I'm not certainly a geologist. I couldn't answer that specifically, but I think that what we're looking at is really the debris that's related to the fire, and everyone wants to plant a tree. We don't really need a whole lot of trees planted right now. We're trying to get those trees out that are dead, to revegetate in some way, but mostly it's to prevent. It's like cement right now. The soil is what they call hydrophobic, and it will not absorb water. So it's like throwing water on a cement driveway and expecting it to be absorbed. It just won't, and it just carries that water more quickly. So through the efforts of the Colorado Department of Transportation, the Forest Service, working with the city and the county and Colorado Springs Utilities and the nonprofit partners that are at the table, as well as folks from Flying W and the Navigators, we have a regional recovery group that meets monthly to discuss what's going on with the different projects, because we know this is a regional issue, and frankly, stormwater knows nothing except running downhill.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons I think that folks need to really be aware of how important the stormwater issue is in this community, not just in the watershed where we're talking about today, but in other areas throughout El Paso County.
What are the largest concerns you have moving forward in both recovery and keeping this from happening again like Manitou last year?
Well, I think funding is always a concern. The emergency watershed protection money that we were able to get through the legislature in Congress last year, what came as a result of a lot of work and a lot of lobbying our congressional delegation and them lobbying at the national level to release those funds. EWP, or Emergency Watershed Protection Money, is not a bucket that's customarily funded, so it has to be appropriated new for emergency purposes, and there was no money. So we worked together with Larimer County, who had witnessed and been a part of the High Park fire, to try and get that done. And Congressman Gardner carried that through the House, really got that moving, and then our senators from the Senate side worked through the Senate to get that done as well. Continued funding is certainly a challenge, especially when all of the budget discussions go on at the national level. And looking at the pre-mitigation, when you look at the Forest Service budget, they get X amount of billions of dollars, and then when there are big fires, they have to take the money out of their standing budget. The Forest Service, I heard just this morning when we were talking to the Forest Service, 51% of their budget now is going into fire suppression.
Wow.
And that's changed over the years. It's not traditionally been the case.
Okay.
The other thing that you ask about a concern and that we have no control over, but we try to educate people about, is the weather.
Mhm.
Because what's going to create us problems, what created us problems last year in Manitou, was the rate of the rain occurrence in Manitou and where it hit on the burn scar. Because generally we figure if it's falling at the rate of roughly 3 inches an hour, if it rains for 15 to 20 minutes, even if we only get an inch of rain, but it falls in that 15 to 20 minute time frame, we're probably going to have flooding somewhere. Now that's hugely different if we have that same 3 inches of rain over 2 days. There's probably enough time that it's not falling fast enough that it can get enough acceleration to create a flooding problem.
It was really the perfect storm last summer with Manitou. I mean, we had the burn scar, and then we had that heavy rain over a very short period of time.
And an isolated area.
Yes.
One of the messages that we try to get out in our flash flooding education, obviously on the radio, the people can't see the pictures, but we have a picture of a extensive mud flow going down the 24 bypass into Manitou, and above it's all blue sky. Because where the debris was flowing, it wasn't raining.
Yeah.
But 3 miles up the hill, it was raining, and raining really hard, but not for a long period of time. I mean, it was a real isolated storm in a very isolated area, and that Williams Canyon area that the commissioner was talking about behind the Cave of the Winds there, and it already had a ton of debris on it, because for the old timers in the area, which I'm sure you're not one of, Captain Dan, but the old road to the Cave of the Winds used to go up Williams Canyon.
That's right.
And there's a video on the Library Channel where they show that, somebody driving an old Chrysler 300
Wow.
up there and saying, hey, be careful, but you'll make it. Well, that road was decommissioned and just kind of fell apart. Well, all that road base now is also debris.
Right.
So you have fire debris, to the commissioner's credit, and I'm not actually sure whose idea this was. It might have been her idea and she drugged me along. But
Sure.
we hiked Williams Canyon up to the confluence of Williams and Waldo Canyon, took pictures. And at the confluence, you can see where the trees are like 6 feet embedded in sediment. Well, all that staged sediment waiting to come down the hill,
Wow.
along with 2.5 miles of road base. So Manitou's doing some significant projects under the Emergency Watershed Protection Act. I think the one right at the base of Waldo Canyon's like $1.9 million, because actually, we've hiked that a couple times, once with our engineers, and there's no good place to put detention up there.
Uh-huh.
Because there's so much limestone rock, which is what Cave of the Winds is made up of, but it's so porous, there's no place to anchor anything.
Mhm.
So they're trying to build anchors at the bottom of the canyon to catch the major debris, and it was a major debris that destroyed the houses along Canyon Avenue last year.
Well, and one of the residents told me when we went up right after one of the major floods, that it only took about 60 seconds between the sky was blue, as RC pointed out, the rain had stopped, he looked up and thought, I better move my car, and within 60 seconds, he couldn't move his car. The debris had come down Williams Canyon,
Wow.
down the drainage and into Manitou Springs, and wedged the car in. So luckily, no one during that particular flood was hurt or killed in this case, but essentially we know what the damage that it did, and it costs money regardless of whether the federal government and the state government comes in. We still have to, at the local level, whether that's the city of Manitou Springs or El Paso County or the city of Colorado Springs or utilities, we have to pay a match to get some of those dollars. So in general, the emergency watershed protection money takes a 25% match. So here we have to take out of our general fund in order to make up that difference, or provide, like we've worked with Coalition for the Upper South Platte and Rocky Mountain Field Institute, they can help provide volunteers that count towards your match in doing some of these projects.
Okay, Western states governors were in town
Mhm.
not long ago. Are they going to help in our campaign for more money and help? And are they learning from our experiences?
Absolutely. I think that we, through our relationship with the Nature Conservancy, we were able to set up a tour of some of the projects that we're doing here. And I think, the unfortunate or fortunate part is we're kind of a model. We hear that we're doing a good job. We have a regional recovery group working on issues, and they were very interested in how we were doing the mitigation and how we were sort of trying to get ahead of it as it relates to what's happening at the national level. And I think, again, that goes back to making the case to Congress to fund the Forest Service properly for mitigation pre-mitigation disasters, so that we thin those forests. Pikes Peak has, from what I've heard, 1,000 trees per acre, and it's supposed to be closer to 100 per acre for a healthy forest. We have to not be afraid to cut our trees and also adapt our communities in terms of fire adaptive communities, to do your own part if you live in an urban wildland interface area and not grow your trees up right next to your house.
Are we in any better shape this year than, say, we were 2 years ago before Waldo Canyon?
As far as the overall fire risk goes, probably not. Because the thing that has helped us is we've had a damp, cooler spring.
Mm-hmm.
If you think back to the Waldo fire this time 2 years ago, we were in a record-setting run of over 100-degree days, and windy every single day.
Yeah.
So again, that created the scenario for that fire to explode like it did. We haven't had a day over 100 degrees yet. It's just been considerably cooler. We've had more moisture, but we haven't had enough long-term moisture to, and kind of building on something Commissioner said, to change the health of the forest. We're still in kind of a drought area, so those bigger trees still take longer. The Forest Service divides them into types of fuel based into how long it takes them to recover fuel. The finest grasses being what they call an hour fuel, so people know that if your grass is damp that morning, you can go out in the afternoon and mow it and it just blows away, because in an hour all that moisture is gone. Those bigger trees are 1,000-hour fuels, so it takes 1,000 hours of damper weather or higher relative humidity for them to recover fuel. And we haven't had that kind of break because we haven't had that much moisture. We've had a couple isolated storms, but it's been considerably cooler.
That has to help quite a bit.
Absolutely.
We've had red flag warnings
Yeah.
to this point, and you can go outside and literally from 10 o'clock you have this lush green yard to 3 o'clock you walk out there and you've got brown spots developing and dryness, and that's how quick the wind and the warmer temperatures just suck that moisture out of the vegetation.
And I think what folks need to just take away from this is to not be scared, but be prepared. Remember that, if you live in an area that is prone to flash flooding, make sure that you have a plan, make sure that you know where to go. In Manitou Springs, they have the siren that'll go off, and and the economic impact is something that we really haven't put a very, I think, significant number to yet. And I know FEMA will be in town next week to do an analysis of what the economic impact of some of these fires have had, because the loss of business, not just during the fire, but after the fire, and then the flood happens, and the next thing you know, it's on national news that, killer floods hit Colorado. Well, that's not reality, but that's what sells, I guess, national news.
Yeah, sure.
What we have to just focus on really is helping our local businesses to recover from this, and to just be prepared, so that if you're in an area that's prone, that you remember to get up, not go down to the stream and see what's going on, to be cooperating with your agencies, and to do what you can individually as somebody who may own property that's in the wildland urban interface, to reduce your ladder fuels, the fuels that are below the trees, so that you cut your trees up, so that if fire comes, it doesn't go up the tree, it just kind of hits the ground. You probably saw the video that I believe Steve Schoper did with the city of Colorado Springs during the Black Forest fire. That really shows fire behavior and what happens when you do mitigate. It does make a difference, and we've seen that in various areas within our county when we've had these two devastating wildfires.
We had a mitigation specialist from the city in with us last year after Black Forest, and we were talking about how to properly clear, your area. And they would talk about some of the challenges they face. The junipers look so nice under your deck, but they call them, gasoline on a stick, because they go up and then whoosh. And I guess we really need to be smart about what we're doing with the proximity of our home.
And the other thing is too, I think we have talked a little bit about flood insurance. The importance that some folks may be in flood areas now that were never in a floodplain. It's not in a floodplain, but it is in an area where you have these deep channels that are going to drain right down into your property, and we've seen that up in the Cascade area and up Ute Pass, as well as in Manitou Springs, and even in the city of Colorado Springs. You need to be prepared and make sure that you have your flood insurance, and look at the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP program, to make sure that you have that coverage, even if you're not in a floodplain.
Wow.
And we did work this last year at the national level with National Association of Counties, of making sure that the increases that were going to happen as a result of flood insurance changes were lowered a little bit, which make it more affordable. But it's really something that's very important for folks to realize, that you don't have to be in a floodplain to necessarily be impacted by the flash flooding after the fire.
Now, in terms of insurance and recovery, how are those people whose homes were affected by either the flood or the fires doing? Are they able to get the funds from whoever their insurance company might have been to rebuild the homes, or are those struggles still going on in the county?
Well, we're still struggling with it.
That question is all over the board, and it ranges from people that had adequate insurance and knew what their policy said, to people in the Black Forest area, unfortunately, some people that had lived in homesteads that their families had built 75 years ago, had never had a mortgage on the place, and did not even have fire insurance at all.
Wow.
So they were a complete loss. One of the things that the commissioners facilitated is bringing in United Policyholders, which is a nonprofit insurance group, and they've done, I think, 10 probably different seminars for Waldo Canyon and Black Forest. They actually came in, I think, after the Black Forest fire, but we invited the people from Waldo Canyon that were infected in Mountain Shadows, and the first thing that their representative always say is, read your policy. Know what your policy says and how it affects you, and keep it someplace safe. And the other thing for people is, and since we're kind of hitting all over the disaster board between fires and flooding and that type of thing, is have an inventory of the things you have. Because once you leave in a hurry, and on emergency preparedness, we talk about having the things that you're going to need, whether it's forms of ID, government forms of ID, passports, your insurance papers,
Mhm.
access to safety deposit box if you have other papers there. But then you leave and you have that stuff, hopefully you're healthy and everything's fine, but your home is destroyed, and then trying to remember all the things that you've accumulated over the past 40 to 50 years.
Yeah.
And things that were handed down to you. And, you know, that I sat through one of them, and it was just a heart-wrenching story about a gentleman who had received weapons that his great-grandfather had had from the 90s.
Wow.
1890s.
Yeah.
You know, rifles and stuff that were just completely consumed in the fire. Because the people that have seen those pictures of the fire, when those houses collapse into the foundation, that's just like a firebox. And I mean, it melts everything down. I mean, just destroys everything. And then people can't remember, like, well, what was this or what was that? So the thing that, you know, that the commissioner's been really on the front end of is, you know, have an inventory of what's in your house. Video those things.
Mhm.
You know, take a picture of everybody's got camera phones now. You know, you get a new big screen for Christmas, take a picture of it. So if something does happen, where
Yeah.
you're burglarized or whatever, and the insurance agent's like, well, now what was it exactly? Here's a picture of it. You
Yeah.
know, I was getting ready to watch the Bronco game, and it was 72 inches,
Ah.
and, you know. So, I mean, yeah, trying to lighten it up a little, but it's serious business, and most people aren't that prepared. And to be blunt about it, insurance companies are all over the board too, with how they work with their different insureds.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You know.
we heard, even during Waldo, and United Policyholders came in kind of after the fact and was helping actually with some changes at the state level that actually helped in the Black Forest fire with regard to their policies. But what we saw too was the biggest problems were not necessarily the complete loss, it was the partial loss that's so difficult, because the smoke, whether there's smoke damage, at what level will your insurance company come in, and that was why it was important to have United Policyholders, I think, help in the Black Forest fire, because they're a nonprofit. And they could come in sort of as a third party that would help facilitate the discussion and at least show people what their rights were in terms of their insurance policies. And it depended on the adjuster sometimes of what you
That's
could get
true.
a good or bad deal. But just to keep pushing, because that's been a really difficult problem. Like RC said, there were a lot of folks that weren't insured, and that, of course, that's the first thing you got to do is make sure. We had even some properties that were not even on the assessor's rolls in terms of, and the assessor went through and was trying to help us identify those properties. And it was a difficult process, very different from the Waldo Canyon and the Mountain Shadows piece.
Yeah, and I know just in the case of the flooding in Manitou, that same storm out east up in the Glen Eagle area where we live, heavy hail, damaging, water coming down, and we had the assessor come out, and, he came out 3 times, and each time he came out, we found other things. So you have to press the point, because you're your own advocate there, really.
Right.
So, anything before we let you go that is of paramount importance people should know about?
Well, I think, again, we have a page called waldorecovery.com that folks can get information on our various meetings that we're having on the Waldo Canyon fire recovery, and information on flood preparedness as well. Certainly be aware, don't be scared, but be prepared. I think that the fact that it's, with FEMA is working on a whole campaign now, it's their Prepare-a-thon, and that's something that we've been engaged at a national level as well, to be prepared in advance of these things happening, and take whatever, remedies you can individually. Make sure you have your flood insurance policies, make sure you have your plan in place, you inventory your things, because you just never know. It can be anything. It can be a house fire, and you'll still be prepared. So it's not just about the flooding, although we're doing what we can to slow down that water, take that debris out, and make sure that businesses can remain open, and Highway 24 does. RC, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think there's all kinds of resources on the website, and FEMA's a good place to start. Like the commissioner said, at the spring kickoff, we participated, El Paso County, in the Prepare-a-thon, and we will this fall. They're going to do it 2 times a year, but just go to FEMA.com, enter Prepare-a-thon, and they'll show you how to prepare lists of what's important. And then follow up on the insurance thing. If for some reason you are involved in an unfortunate incident, make sure you have an inventory of the things that you have.
Okay.
Because you're not, especially in a high-stress time like that. You
The
know,
best
because-
time to do that is now, when we're
Right.
not in a high-stress time, as
Right.
opposed to, gee, there's fire over the hill, is it gonna take my house?
And what are you gonna do with your pets?
Yes,
You know,
yeah,
I think
yeah.
Another
we,
great
we
point.
see that
Yeah.
a lot with
Right.
families that don't wanna leave because their pets are behind, and, you know, that's taking a big risk.
You know, we could go on for another half
could.
hour. I appreciate you both coming in, RC, the efforts on our behalf out there with the mitigation. Sallie, as always, as County Commissioner. And then as Second Vice President of the National Association of Counties in Washington, thank you so much, both of
Thanks.
you. So there you have it, this week's Issues and You on the Clear Channel stations of Southern Colorado. Thank you for listening. I'm Captain Dan.